Hello and welcome to The Top Story, the podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, major U.S. trading partners have vowed to retaliate against the Trump administration's protectionist policies. The United States has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And the Pakistani army says its security forces have killed the separatist militants who hijacked a train in Balochistan province. We begin in North America. Major U.S. trading partners have vowed to retaliate against the Trump administration's protectionist policies. Canada, the largest supplier of steel and aluminium to the U.S., has announced 25% retaliatory tariffs on those materials and other goods. Analysts are sounding the alarm that a sustained trade war could trigger a U.S. economic recession. Jim Spellman reports.
At the stroke of midnight, new global U.S. tariffs went into effect. 25% on steel and aluminum imports, no exceptions, no exemptions. Canada is striking back immediately. Beginning Thursday, Canada will launch new tariffs on roughly $21 billion worth of U.S. goods, including steel, computers, and sporting goods.
We are living through one of the most serious moments in the history of Canada. Today, the United States are pursuing their assault on Canada with a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum from Canada. These tariffs are not only unacceptable, they are unjustified. They will have a considerable negative economic impact, as my colleague said, on both sides of the border.
Canada avoided an additional 25% U.S. tariff on its steel and aluminum after a provincial leader backed down on a threat to increase electricity rates for some U.S. customers. Analysts warn the U.S. tariffs and global countermeasures could trigger a U.S. recession.
That raises the cost of doing business. It raises the cost of final goods and services that consumers purchase. All of that together does raise the specter of a recession potentially coming.
But despite the risk, U.S. President Donald Trump shows no signs of backing down.
And I think that the tariffs that we're talking about, and again, reciprocal, I think that the tariffs, there are some cases where they're a little beyond reciprocal because, we've been abused for a long time as a country. We have been abused really for a long time, and we will be abused no longer.
It's unclear exactly how far President Trump is willing to go with tariffs. He has said he's open to negotiations with various countries, but it's not clear what he wants. That uncertainty is weighing on businesses and consumers.
That was Jim Spellman reporting. The tariffs has also impacted Mexico, where the raw metals industry depends greatly on trade with the U.S. However, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she will wait to see how talks with Washington progress in the next 2 weeks before making a decision on her reciprocal tariffs. Alistair Baverstock reports from Mexico City.
Despite last-ditch efforts by Mexico to negotiate with the Trump administration, with the country's economy minister travelling to Washington in an attempt to avert the metal tariffs, it wasn't enough. And 25% US levies have now been applied to all steel and aluminum imported from America's southern neighbour. Mexico exported about 2 million tonnes of steel to the US last year.
This is a very strong and hard movement against the Mexican economy. Even though we are not the first exporter of aluminum to the United States, or neither from steel, this impact within the tariffs will imply the disruption in the supply chain.
Mexico has made no announcements so far regarding possible retaliatory tariffs, although President Claudia Sheinbaum has threatened such measures. The US runs a trade surplus with Mexico on steel, exporting more than double the amount of raw metal than what it imported last year. But tariff-hit raw metals coming into Mexico would come at a cost to other key national industries.
The problematic for us to make a retaliation in the exact same sector will be an implosion in the economic industry, especially in these ones, in the industry of automotive and steel, which are one of the most important ones for our industrial development.
Mexico's automotive sector, an industry set to be heavily impacted, sees the tariffs as a way to bring about an end goal of speeding up North American free trade renegotiations, currently set for 2026.
I believe this is about forcing Mexico to the free trade negotiations. A brief period of tariffs exerts pressure on America's neighbors and strengthens the U.S. negotiating position. From our perspective, the sooner this happens, the better.
With 25% tariffs now in place on steel and aluminum, the first blow of a US trade war with Mexico has been struck. The industrial sector is now waiting to see how Mexico will respond.
That was Alistair Baverstock in Mexico City. Moving on to Europe. The United States has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine after Kyiv said it was ready to support Washington's proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski confirmed on Wednesday that U.S. military aid deliveries to Ukraine through Poland have resumed to previous levels. Ross Cullen reports.
They were one of two key objectives that Ukraine also had at those talks in Jeddah on Tuesday, the restoration of military aid from the United States. A lot of it had been stockpiled in Poland. That's why we've got the confirmation that is flowing again, and also the restoration of intelligence sharing on a military level by the United States, and that is also flowing again, according to Tulsi Gabbard, the United States Director of National Intelligence. We have been hearing from Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian president has been giving a news briefing. He's been speaking about that ceasefire proposal, echoing the words of Marco Rubio that the ball is in Russia's court now. He said it fully depends on Russia. Ukraine demonstrated and outlined its positions in a very direct way without reservations. We can listen in now to a little bit more of what Volodymyr Zelensky had to say.
My take of it is whether it can bring us closer to the end of this war or not. I think that today we had to show our readiness, not just in terms of what we have, in terms of how we are living through it, but we have to show the whole world in real terms what we are ready to do, and we did it.
That was Ross Cullen reporting. Russia has said it will reveal details from Washington about a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine before responding. The Kremlin has confirmed the upcoming meeting between the Russian and American delegations. Dasha Chinishova reports from Moscow.
Moscow has confirmed that it is now waiting to be briefed by the American side about the negotiations that the Americans had with the Ukrainian delegation in Saudi Arabia. And Moscow doesn't want to get ahead of itself on the proposed truce, saying that the information from the United States will have to be digested first. And the Kremlin has also confirmed that there is the upcoming meeting between the Russian and American delegations. However, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov didn't extrapolate on the possibility of U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff meeting the Russian president, as it has been suggested by several news outlets. So at this stage, we understand Moscow is going to be briefed. Moscow is waiting for the details to emerge. It is carefully looking at the statements that have been made by the sides of those talks in Saudi Arabia in the media sphere. But also, we understand that if necessary, there could be the possible conversation between the presidents of the two countries. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin can talk over the phone, something that Trump has hinted and Moscow said has not yet been arranged, but noted that could be set up on a short notice. Having said that, the Russian position on any temporary truce or freezing of the conflict has always been very negative, with Moscow saying that Ukraine would use this time to be rearmed by the Western countries and to regroup on the battlefield.
That was Dasha Chinishova in Moscow. Meantime, the defense ministers of France, Germany, Italy, Poland and the UK have met in Paris. They focused on supporting Ukraine and boosting Europe's defense. Ukraine's defense minister joined the conference via video. Stuart Smith has more.
It's a two-part meeting, with the first focused on how these E5 nations, as they are known, the biggest military spenders in Europe, can help Ukraine. It's important what these five think, because they will be the ones that will be at the forefront of any security guarantees that come from Europe in order to support Ukraine. And to that end, the Ukrainian defence minister has joined by video link as well to discuss what these people are able to achieve. Now, one concern has developed over the past few days is that Italy doesn't see a path to security guarantees in Ukraine through troop deployments to the country. So that could mean that the UK and France's plan, which would involve troop deployments as part of a ceasefire, there might not be as supported as had previously been expected. The reason these two countries, especially the UK and France and three others, Poland, Italy and Germany, believe this is necessary now is not just about Ukraine, though. It's also about broader European security, and there's a big concern about getting European industry, the arms industry, pumping out weapons, ammunition and other machinery that might be required for any potential broader war with Russia. But it's also a moment to signal to the United States that Europe is serious about bringing its defence standards up and about spending more. And these are really the first practical steps that will be taken to that end, with the countries now largely on the same page about the need for increased European security, but differing about what that should mean when it comes to security guarantees for Ukraine.
That was Stuart Smith reporting. In the Middle East, days of intense violence in Syria between government security forces and gunmen loyal to ousted President Bashar al-Assad have caused widespread destruction. More than 1,000 people have been killed, with many others wounded. As the worst-hit towns reel from this horrific episode, much-needed medical aid is just now beginning to arrive. Mihail Balavid has more.
On Wednesday, medical teams from Syria's Idlib and Azaz towns arrived in Banyas, where fierce clashes between gunmen loyal to ousted President Bashar al-Assad and Syrian security forces lasted for several days. Medical staff at the Banyas National Hospital say their building was also targeted by the so-called remnants of the Assad forces.
The fighting reached the hospital entrance and the building suffered significant damage. They targeted us with bombs, RPGs, and artillery. But thank God we were able to push back the assault, and the security forces never abandoned us. May God bless them.
Medical teams worked throughout the day to help with recovery efforts, treating the many injured patients who had been waiting desperately for medical attention.
We came from Idlib in the Azaz area with a team that includes doctors, anesthesia technicians, laboratory specialists, radiology experts, and obstetric staff. We also brought a large supply of medicines to help address shortages at the hospital.
Many locals were trapped in their homes during the violence, unable to reach the hospital. One mother says she was relieved to finally receive treatment for her child.
I have a child who needed regular injections and treatments, but I couldn't reach the hospital, especially after the attacks by Assad loyalists. Thank God, after the security forces intervened and brought the situation under control, we were finally able to access the hospital again.
The supporting medical teams are expected to remain in Banyas until Friday, or longer if needed. More medical aid shipments are also expected, a critical relief for patients in the city's only fully functioning hospital.
That was Mihail Balavid in Syria. Finally, the Pakistani army says its security forces have killed the 33 separatist militants who hijacked a train in the southwestern province of Balochistan, ending a 30-hour standoff. 21 passengers and 4 soldiers were killed. Daniel Khan has more.
The banned separatist group Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the attack that began on Tuesday near the Mushraf Tunnel. The seized train was carrying more than 400 passengers, including security personnel. Officials estimate 70 to 80 militants were involved in the attack. Injured passengers have been shifted to hospitals, while authorities have set up emergency cells for families. The incident has drawn international condemnation, with the United States, China, United Nations, Iran and Germany calling for the hostages' release.
That was Daniel Khan on the aftermath of the passenger train attack in Pakistan. Now recapping the headlines before we go, major U.S. trading partners have vowed to retaliate against the Trump administration's protectionist policies. The United States has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And the Pakistani army says its security forces have killed the separatist militants who hijacked a train in Balochistan province. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thanks for listening.